All right, here we are. Steve Palmer here with Lawyer Talk here at the Roundtable with Norm, and this is one of our Roundtable sessions. And those folks who know what the Roundtable session is, it means it's going to be long, it's going to be fun, and there's going to be lots of great information. And today, even better, we've got a guest, nationally known, another attorney, been involved in all sorts of litigation. Rob Muise, are you there, Rob?
I'm here. Great to be with you guys.
Good morning, Rob.
Good morning.
And Rob is joining us. Where are you, Rob, right now?
I'm just outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay, so what we'll do, we'll get the basics out of the way. Tell us a little bit about what you do. Obviously, you've got an organization, you've got some causes. Just give us the quick little thumbnail bio.
Sure. I'm the co-founder and senior counsel of the American Freedom Law Center. We're in our 10th year anniversary right now, but I've been doing nonprofit civil rights litigation for well over 20 years. The American Freedom Law Center is a national nonprofit public interest law firm. We take cases that are in the public interest, typically cases involving the First Amendment, the right to free speech, the right to religious exercise. That's probably the majority of our cases. All of our work is pro bono, for the good. We're a 501c3 organization, so all the legal work we do and the cases we do across the country, I've literally have had cases from Massachusetts to Hawaii. We do cases all over the country defending religious liberty and the freedom of speech. And like I said, we're a nonprofit, and by winning our civil rights cases, we get attorney's fees, and we also rely on donations for the work we do. But again, it's in the public interest, right? The courts have said time and again that upholding the constitutional rights of a party is always in the public interest, right? Because when you defend the constitutional rights of one plaintiff, you're also defending the constitutional rights of all. The other thing is I was an officer in the Marine Corps for 13 years before my this second career as a lawyer, and I typically describe myself not as a lawyer but as a Marine with a law degree, and so that's kind of my approach to the litigation, because this is we describe it also as lawfare, because so much of what has affected our culture negatively, in my view, has occurred through the courts and not through the democratic process. And, as a Marine officer, you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I went to law school, left my active duty infantry officer career because, in my view, there were more domestic enemies to the Constitution who are affecting our liberties and our freedoms here in the United States in the courtrooms. And so I basically hung up my pack and my rifle and got my law degree, and I like to think I'm just continuing that same battle, that same fight, but doing so in the courtrooms.
I know, I confess I did a couple quick Google searches, and, I'll just throw it out there. I saw like hate group, anti-Islamist, lawfare, horrible people group. And, like anything else, once you dig behind the name calling and all the facade of that, it looked to me like what you guys are doing is just championing constitutional rights. Why don't you comment quickly on some of those mudslinging comments?
Well, you got to consider the source of the mudslinging, because where that comes from is the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Sure.
And if anybody knows anything about the Southern Poverty Law Center, I mean, talk about a hate group. It's a George Soros-funded progressive organization. Quite frankly, I think it's an indication that we're having an impact on the culture when we make it on the list of the Southern Poverty Law Center, right? If you're known by your enemies, well, then that's a good enemy list to be on, right? And I forget who said that famous quote: "If you don't have any enemies, you haven't done anything." And so it's that's the way they attack. They engage in ad hominem attacks. Hate group. It's so absurd. I mean, just my background too, in addition to being, 13 years on active duty, honorably served in the Marine Corps. I'm a father of 12 kids and, devout Catholic. My colleague is an Orthodox Jew from New York, of all things. So we like to describe ourselves as the nation's first truly authentic Judeo-Christian public interest law firm. The idea that, and just to give you an idea how absurd some of these accusations are, they've described at times my colleague as like a neo-Nazi white supremacist. I'm like, the guy's an Orthodox Jew. He's got a beard. He wears a yarmulke. It's just, it's like the same where they call Larry Elder, the black face of white supremacy. I mean, these guys, that's what they engage in. They engage in ad hominem attacks. And the Southern Poverty Law Center is front and center in all of that.
Well,
another group like Alliance Defending Freedom and other Christian organizations are on their hit list as well. But it's absurd.
Yeah, but Rob, they got on the map, doing decades ago, doing some good work chasing down the Klan, and it's probably reflective that society has evolved, and a lot of these formerly very essential ACLU and other groups like that during the transition from Jim Crow to where we are today, those organizations have kind of lost their mission, because a lot of these social situations that existed back in the 60s and 70s and maybe even into the 80s with the Southern Poverty Law Center, a lot of those conditions are not prevalent in society anymore. So they retargeted. They're after they've changed their mission, and yet they're still using that the banner of civil rights, and we're the white hats, we're the good guys. But now they're targeting conservatives, and they're targeting essential civil rights freedoms in a way that it betrays what they used to stand for. It's just terrible. So it's a badge
just the
of
progressive
honor.
left. I mean, that's kind of the way they operate now, right? And so many times, right? They accuse conservatives of being exactly what they are, in so many ways.
And
that's
they're the anti-freedom, the anti-civil rights block, instead of what they purportedly started out to be.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to cover, some big sort of
let's
some
talk
newsworthy stuff that's
sir.
going on. But before I do that, you got a couple cases I noticed that are getting some national recognition as we speak. In other words, you've got stuff in litigation. What do you got going on right now?
Well, one of the ones that I think is quite interesting is the lawsuit against Twitter and the Biden administration on behalf of a doctor out of Arizona. And as anyone on the conservative side knows, social media is very big on canceling, right? The whole cancel culture, anything that doesn't go along with whatever their propaganda message is, and particularly with regard to all these COVID-19 restrictions. Our client, Colleen Huber, is a naturopathic, I think is the term they use for a physician in Arizona, and she was just posting up from reputable news sources in Israel and from Israel. Israeli studies on the efficacy of the vaccines, and she was banned, and they canceled her Twitter account and shut her down. And we know through even open sources that the Biden administration and Twitter in particular were working in conjunction, working together to ensure that what they described as misinformation. I love that, right? That's the new term, is misinformation. Yeah. It's very Orwellian. Right, because who gets to decide what's misinformation? If you want to, have a campaign against misinformation, and let me be the arbiter of what's misinformation, they probably wouldn't like that, right? They like to be the arbiters of what is and what is not acceptable speech. Now, Twitter, and this is going to get into some of the First Amendment issues. Twitter alone is a private entity. In order to trigger constitutional rights, you have to have what's called state action, meaning you have to have a government entity that's actually involved in the censorship of the speech. The Bill of Rights is a break on the power of government. And just as a footnote, the Bill of Rights aren't a conferring of rights on anybody by the government. Those are inalienable rights endowed by our Creator, as a Declaration of Independence terms use. And the Bill of Rights is basically telling the government, these are areas you have no business of messing with. And one of them is the right to free speech. But in order for the Bill of Rights to be triggered, is you have to have a state actor, you have to have a government actor. It's a break up. For example, and I get calls all the time. I wanted to hand out literature outside of Walmart, and they told me I had to leave and I couldn't distribute my literature. Well, distributing literature is a First Amendment protected activity. It is, but so long as it's the government that's prohibiting you from doing so, you don't have any constitutional rights vis-a-vis Walmart or any other private actor. But there's exceptions to that rule, and one of them is if the state actor and the private actor are engaging in a conspiracy. Now, conspiracy is a legitimate legal claim, right? You hear it all the time, though, thrown out as, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory, right? And just a way to undermine the legitimacy of what the claim is. But I guarantee you, pretty much every single day here in the United States, there are conspiracy claims that are being prosecuted by the federal government, whether it be drug conspiracies or otherwise, as well as civil conspiracies. And in order to demonstrate a conspiracy as a matter of a legal claim, is you have to show an agreement between the state actor and the private party and some act in furtherance of that agreement. Now, the agreement doesn't have to be, something written in a contract, or because nobody does that, right? The dumbest of all criminals, will engage in a contract to engage in criminal activity.
Sure.
But so you can show that through circumstantial evidence. And there's been plenty of open sources that Twitter and the Biden administration were working together. In fact, they even used a term in one of their official press releases that they've entered into a partnership, right, to stop the misinformation supposedly on, through these the Twitter accounts. And so we've alleged that this conspiracy between the Biden administration and Twitter to censor speech that doesn't promote the agenda of the Biden administration, particularly with regard to these vaccines, is a suppression of speech. It triggers the First Amendment rights of our client. In fact, we filed it as a class action lawsuit as well, because this censorship of conservative speech, if you want to call it, about vaccines and so forth, is widespread and rampant. And just look at any news source and you'll see
right.
How they're doing. And you even see Jen Psaki at the podium at the White House, calling on social media to be responsible and to shut down misinformation. Right? We saw all the controversy with Joe Rogan because he happened to have a doctor with incredible credentials talking about the mRNAs and the effects of the mRNA vaccines and so forth. And this is just wrong, right? The right to freedom of speech, I think it was from New York Times and others, made the point. You want to have a marketplace of ideas, right? And it's in that marketplace that the consumer decides what are the good ideas, what are the bad ideas. And what the left wants to do is they want to shut out an entire category of ideas so that there's no competition for what their particular ideas are. And you think about misinformation. In my view, the king of misinformation is Anthony Fauci. Right, he's the guy that, if you remember, just a year ago, these lockdowns are essential. They're going to save millions of lives. What was the science that Anthony Fauci was relying on? And then we just see this Johns Hopkins study that comes out recently and says, oh no, those are a terrible idea. The collateral damage, the number of lives saved by these lockdowns was minuscule, if even measurable. But the collateral damage caused by these lockdowns was huge, costing hundreds of thousands of lives because of these lockdowns. So shut down Anthony Fauci. Why isn't the left calling for Anthony Fauci to close his trap and stop talking about COVID-19 restrictions? Because the guy's been wrong almost every time.
Right. The government,
this is a serious problem.
The government understanding of misinformation, it seems to be, is any information that is different than what they're disseminating. But if their information turns out to be factually false, well, you can't talk about it.
Rob, if I can pop in, so there's, I think the conservatives have largely taken up what I would call the true scientific method side of this argument. So a lot of the people have been deplatformed, like Alex Berenson off of Twitter, and others are true middle of the road, either journalists or scientists that really don't have a political bias at all. And it's just that the conservatives seem to be, for sure, although there's Bill Maher and some other people who are Johnny-come-latelys from the liberal side, progressive side, but most of the blowback against Twitter and social media seems to be coming from the conservative side, mainly because we really do, speaking as a conservative, we really do want science to be debated. And the scientific method throughout history, at least since Galileo anyway, has been an open debate. And things are, Newtonian physics is still called theory. Because nothing is ever finally proven in science. Everything should be challengeable. And what you're trying to do is restore us back to an open First Amendment, kind of atmosphere where we can all talk openly and hash out things. And, what you're doing is so essential and so important.
Well, let me follow up on that too, because you're talking about your lawsuit against Twitter, and in order to, because Twitter, everybody would say, and you hear this on the news, and I know you've answered it, but I'm going to try to summarize it. It's like, wait a minute, Twitter can do whatever they want. They're a private company, and your response to that is, yeah, except they're doing it in concert with the government, in this case, the White House. And it's not only just a conspiracy, they've got a contract or an agreement or a partnership, I think you said.
Yeah, they said.
Yeah, they said. And that is how you're getting around this idea that Twitter is acting as a private company. But let's say Twitter, can I just sue Twitter? What are the rules there? Because I know there's a lot of debate about this. Can Facebook take me down? And say there's no partnership with the White House. How does that work?
Yeah, they have, and this is, but there's a couple. I want to get back to one of the points that Norm made. I'll answer this question, but I want to get because it's an important point, difference between science and public policy, sure, relying on science. And that's an important concept, and to distinguish those two things. But to your point directly, they have terms of service, right? And if you, and it's, the fine print, the lawyer fine print that even as lawyers, I never read that stuff. I know most people don't read it, and it gives them, a lot of authority to take, adverse actions against you. But that's also supported by this Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, Section 230 of the CDA, which is also part of our lawsuit. And that's an important federal statute in so many ways. Section 230 has some very good parts of it and some very bad parts of it. It operates as a shield in one respect, and it also operates as a sword. The shield part I have no problem with. So, for example, if your law firm operates a blog, or my law firm operates a blog, or you have an open Facebook account where you have friends that can respond and make comments or post on your blog. If somebody posts on your platform, whether it be your Facebook page or posts up on your blog or something, and they post something that is defamatory as a matter of law, the individual who did the posting, who engaged in the speech, can still be liable for the defamatory speech, but Section 230 protects you against third parties, against being sued by that third party for allowing that blogger to make the comment on your blog post or on your Facebook page and so forth. And if you didn't have that, and to me this does create more of a marketplace of ideas. Otherwise, could you imagine trying to run your blog or your Facebook or whatever, where you have to be constantly vigilant as to what's being posted and deciding whether it's legal or illegal and so forth. So I have no problem with that shield aspect of Section 230 and protecting those who want to create platforms or blogs or whatever to have people to engage in that exchange, right? That's what blogs do. They get people on, they start commenting. And quite frankly, if you go to any news source, right, you go to a Fox News page and they have a story up, there's often a section where you can put comments in. And sometimes, somebody might put a comment in there that's actually defamatory against somebody, but Fox News shouldn't be held liable for that. And to police that would just be unwieldy. But Section 230 also operates as a sword, and it gives them the authority to shut down any material that they consider to be quote unquote objectionable. And this is where I have a problem, because it's one thing, like when you have a Twitter account or you have a Facebook account or a Facebook page, that's your Facebook page, that's your Twitter account. You're using that for your, to convey the messages that you want to convey and so forth. And if, Twitter's not liable for the things that I put on there, but then they also get the authority to go and shut down what I don't like or what they don't like in as far as their terms of service. So, for example, in California, they have a civil rights statute that's very broadly the Unruh Act, which also applies to providers of internet service. And you can't discriminate on any basis, including political views. So arguably, when Twitter shuts you down in California, they're violating the California Civil Rights statute, which is applicable against private entities. It's a statute. It's not a constitutional provision. It's a civil statute that applies against private actors. But you can't sue Twitter or Facebook because Section 230 provides them with immunity. And one of the things we've argued is that Section 230 in itself creates a state action in the sense that there's cases that make the point that if there's a federal or state law, right, because the law is state action, right, it's passed by the government, that changes the legal relationship of the parties, which this plainly does, then state action can be found to challenge the law itself. For example, can you imagine if they passed a law, a local city ordinance that said, you can engage in an assault against somebody who's Asian, but it's not an assault, and some Asian gets beat up on the sidewalk, and there's no assault. That statute would violate equal protection, right? So in my view, Section 230 is unlawful in that respect. It changes the legal relationship of the parties. It allows these social media companies to operate as a sword, and it doesn't provide the defense. And to me, that undermines the idea of a marketplace of ideas, a free marketplace of ideas, a free exchange of ideas. I mean, think, for example, Twitter shuts down President Trump's Twitter feed, but leaves up the Ayatollah Khomeini's, Twitter feed.
Unbelievable.
And so these social media companies have gained so much power and authority that they literally could change the outcome of elections by the way that social media operates today. This is a very important issue. That's what's the nature of these social media, right? They're not government owned. Are they a type of a forum that should apply, First Amendment principles, or is it just, typically the answer to something like that is, well, create your own platforms, right? Which a lot of conservatives are doing now. You've got Rumble and some of these others platforms that don't suppress speech, like YouTube and so forth, and those are starting to build some prominence. But this is a real serious issue because it affects public policy, can affect elections and so forth because of the power that these social media companies wield.
And is there, actually, we'll let you go back and address norms. You wanted to talk about science versus policy, so we'll do that.
Yeah, and this is a quote from and just get to this last point, if I may. This is a recent quote from the U.S. Supreme Court in 2017, in this case, Packingham versus North Carolina. And in that case, they struck down a North Carolina statute, again, so it was state action, right? It was a statute that made it a felony for a registered sex offender to access any commercial social networking site or web page if they knew or should have known that a minor would be on that web page or would use that social media platform. And so that went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck it down as violating the First Amendment. And this was, and because they said, look, it suppresses also, lawful speech, so it can't stand. But this is what the Supreme Court said, again, in 2017. And it's going to this point that, these social media platforms and the internet, there's something unique and different, right? Does our First Amendment jurisprudence need to kind of evolve as technology, evolves? And this is what they said. They said, while in the past there may have been difficulty in identifying the most important places in a spatial sense for the exchange of views, today the answer is clear. It is cyberspace. The vast democratic forms of the internet in general, and social media in particular. In short, social media users employ these websites to engage in a wide array of protected First Amendment activity on topics as diverse as human thought. That's slowly leaning towards, we typically, the town crier was the person on the soapbox, on the public sidewalk, or in the public park, or on the public street. Those are considered traditional public forums where First Amendment protection is at its zenith. So, but we have cyberspaces, right? The new town crier is Joe Rogan on Spotify, or you name the speaker. So it's very interesting, and to see how First Amendment jurisprudence is going to develop in light of social media and the prominence it's taken in terms of the right to free speech and the freedom of the press, and they're working with the government, like our case against Twitter. So this is a really a cutting edge issue that I think that more and more cases may work their way up the Supreme Court. Hopefully our case may be one of them. Getting to Norm's point, and it's a very important one, because remember, science, and Anthony Fauci says, if you criticize me, you're criticizing science. I mean, what a pretentious comment that is. But what is science? Science only measures things. That's all it can do. It can only measure things, and it's only as good as the limitations it places on how it's measuring. Most of these things, like the mask mandates or even these vaccine, those aren't science. Those are public policy. That's somebody who's taking a look at risks versus benefits and making a determination as to whether or not we should have mass. It's not based on science. There's no, for example, I'm representing a Catholic school, Resurrection School, which, by the way, the Sixth Circuit granted en banc review, which we're going to be arguing on March 9th, of challenging the mask mandate of kindergarten students in this Catholic school, which has all sorts of mitigation methods in place. They social distance. They have an air filtration system. They take a lot of steps to ensure there's not a spread. Not to mention, the age of the students are one that aren't susceptible to hospitalization and all the other issues going with it. So why do we have a mask mandate for these students? Was there a scientific test done of the efficacy of masks at Resurrection School, given all the conditions that they have compared to others? Of course not, right? They just take these broad principles, which, by the way, we know, we know the masks don't work. Certainly not these surgical cloth masks. That's been the latest, studies and tests. But they're engaging in public policy. They're not. This isn't science. So for them to say, well, science says you have to do this or do that, that's not true. They're making the determination. It's a public policy determination. And hopefully, at this next midterm elections, those who went with the tyrannical view of restrictions will be tossed out of office because they weren't even efficacious. It's an interesting quote from Ben Franklin. It's posted outside the steps of I think the Pennsylvania Capitol. Something to the effect that those who are willing to give up fundamental liberties for temporary safety deserve neither. And this was Ben Franklin way back, one of our founders. They understood the threat of tyranny, even when in the nature of a public crisis, right? That's the time when we have to be most vigilant of our fundamental freedoms. And unfortunately, and this is a term that Gorsuch used in one of his opinions, challenging these COVID-19 tyrannical restrictions, he said, for some reason, the courts have been sheltering in place. And he said, things don't go well when we do. And they don't, and they haven't. And the courts have been sheltering in place. I think they're starting to wake up a little bit, but that's because I think they were just fearful. And now they realize that, these restrictions aren't having the impact that they said, other than the collateral damage that they're causing. So this is, it's a fight for freedom. That's what it is. And unfortunately, the courts are part of the same cabal of those in power that have been imposing all these draconian restrictions on us.
Yeah, I want to you brought up Rogan and you brought up some of these other sort of social media platforms, but Rogan particularly is interesting to me because, as you said, I remember as a kid going to London and actually standing at the corner of Hyde Park and watching the old guy wearing his Victorian era stuff and shouting out whatever he was shouting out with his scroll. And I asked my dad what that was, and my dad's an attorney and a historian and somewhat of a scholar, and he sort of gave me this is the quintessential bastion of free speech. Hyde Park, London. Yeah. You go there, say whatever you want, and that's not true anymore. But I've often said that after I started the podcast, after we have the roundtable here, we're replacing it. It is here. It's like now they can't get to us. But all of a sudden with Rogan, they're getting to him. And so far, it's only Spotify acting theoretically without government pressure. But what's your take on that? And where do you think it goes? And what's the danger?
Yeah, and initially, Joe Rogan is not a conservative, by any, if anything, he's left, middle left, and that's what's kind of interesting, right? That they're going because he's tapping into an audience that I think the left is absolutely frightened that they could come around on some of these issues that the conservatives have been arguing, for a very long time. I think there's huge danger here, and because of the power of these social media platforms. Because of the power of this of the cancel culture, right? Look at these. I mean, these companies. My goodness, they're so woke, and in terms of the the policies that they're implementing for their companies. This is one of the, when you think about the genius of our founding fathers. When they drafted the Constitution, my view, it has two principal objectives: prevent tyranny and protect liberty. And it does so by its structure, right? We have separation of powers. We have co-equal branches of government. Every time we monkey with that, we mess up that balance of power. And we have, right? We have, and we also have this concept of federalism, where there's powers and this should be to the states and not to the federal government. We totally monkeyed with that with the way the Commerce Clause jurisprudence has been. Our federal government is supposed to be a government of limited enumerated powers, and they're in our back pocket for everything. Yeah. Then we also have the Bill of Rights, which are a break on those powers of government. So every time we interfere with those, we're undermining freedom because there's the balance. It's tyranny and freedom. That's where these things balance out. And the more we lose on freedom, the more you have in terms of tyranny. And our founding fathers, one of the geniuses is, you look at the Bill of Rights. It's probably not by accident that freedom of speech and the right to seek redress of grievances and a free press were in the First Amendment, because they understand that that is the way that you peacefully revolt against your government. Right. There was this, and oh my goodness, there was this latest DHS memo that came out that said, about cracking down on social media misinformation and so forth, because it's creating distrust in the government.
So you mean Department of Homeland Security, right, by DHS?
Department of Homeland Security just recently issued a bulletin February 7th. Yeah, the free press was all about that we don't trust government. We don't, because power corrupts, right? And absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've heard time and time again. And the First Amendment is a break on that to do it peacefully. And as I've argued, that when that fails, what's in the Second Amendment? Because the whole point of the Bill of Rights is that we want to be a free people, free from the tyranny of government. And the more we erode those First Amendment freedoms, right now, quite frankly, I think we're in a non-kinetic civil war. And a lot of this is over speech and what we're able to say, what we're not able to say. And the more you suppress that, I fear what direction that's going. Yes, right? Because when you think about the Revolutionary War, how did the Lexington and Concord, why did that first round get fired? Because the British were coming for the weapons of the Minutemen, right? And so we're in dangerous times right now, in my view, in terms of where we're almost reaching a breaking point. The one thing that's been very good though, and I'm a big fan of Dan Bongino. I don't know if you listen to his podcast or his radio show. And one of the things that he emphasized, and it's not just him, but he's one of the strongest voices on that, is creating this parallel economy, right? Creating these alternate sources such as Rumble or Gab or these others, and trying to build up those other social media platforms. We've officially, I've dumped YouTube. We had 17,000 followers on Facebook. Gone. I'm just, we canceled it. And it's funny, you cancel it, but they leave it up for a month or so before they'll finally take it down. And Twitter and these, people got to start, voting with their feet and taking action. And a lot of small steps. I'm representing a bunch of parents from Loudoun County. Look what they were able to do, right, in Virginia.
Yeah, fantastic.
I think they affected that gubernatorial race, right? Now they have a Republican governor and quite frankly, a very blue state. And it was because the parents were outraged enough that they kept pressing, exercising their First Amendment rights, and changing the outcome. Yeah,
Republican
people need to step up.
Republican lieutenant governor and Republican AG in Virginia as well. So it was a clean sweep. If I may, there was also some memos, and this has been Pentagon policy. Department of Homeland Security, where catchwords have been highlighted to be possibly hate speech or indicative of possible internal, insurgencies. And so the military, one of the things that they were told to look for in social media posts of those in the military during that sweep they did last year was high interest in the Constitution. If a soldier or an airman, posted on social media something about Fifth Amendment, or 10th Amendment, or just in general, maybe talking about Mark Levin's idea about having a new constitutional convention, if that trooper is just talking and speculating on his or her private social media, that was taken to be as a possible evidentiary type of clue to look further into that person as somebody that needs to be weeded out of the military. And then, of course, DHS talked about the word freedom, the actual, it's in the name of your law firm, the word freedom, that's somehow indicative of possibly hate speech. It's just, like you said, Orwellian. I can't wrap my head around it. And I think the military only found allegedly like maybe 120 people that they thought might be, possibly neo-Nazis or Klanners or whatever, and I'm not even sure that that's true. But their sweep was a huge failure because, in fact, 99.9% of our military are good Americans.
Yeah, when just listening to you describe that, I mean, is absolutely shocking, right? You would think that would be something you would hear through Pravda, or right? It was like a Soviet purging of the military or a Chinese purging of the military, but that's our own military. I mean, it's something that I came from 13 years. It's utterly shocking. What they're doing and how dangerous, that is. And you mentioned, the word, the Constitution, as I'd mentioned previously, every officer takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So apparently our oath of office is indicative of, if you take that oath, you're an extremist, apparently. I don't know where this all goes or ends. It's very frightening. It's going to take, I think, an awakening of the American people, which I think there is, right? I'm always eternally optimistic. I always have a lot of hope, as a faithful Catholic, I do, right? And we know that, grace comes from suffering, and we're suffering and being persecuted quite a bit for our beliefs and our ideas. But, it's a battle. And the thing that I think is important for everybody is everybody has a stake in this, in the outcome of this. And everybody can take a small step, whether it be run for your local school board, or how about just showing up at your school board meetings to know what the school boards are actually doing that you're paying the taxes for. Make sure you vote, volunteer to be a poll watcher. So, they don't have these shenanigans that went on during this last election with all these absentee ballots just kind of arriving from nowhere. Do something, dump your Facebook, dump your Twitter accounts, look for these alternate sources, go shop at the companies that promote your ideas and promote your values. Right. I know when there was supposed to be a big, they were a big boycott of Tucker Carlson show, which I'm a big fan of Tucker Carlson. And some of the companies stuck with them. The MyPillow company, Tecovas, great cowboy boots. I ordered a pair of Tecovas boots. I ordered stuff from, and I let them know the reason why I'm purchasing from you is because of this, right? Or the reason why I dumped your account and I'm never shopping at your store is because of this. Right?
Your point about
people need to start taking action.
Your point about grassroots, I just heard, and this is unbelievable. This is really a big thing. I just heard on the radio coming in today that in San Francisco, they threw out 3 of the school board members and replaced them with at least moderate, or if not conservative, I don't know, but they threw out 3 of the school boards in the most recent election because, as one spokesman said for the group that campaigned against them, while they were more interested in renaming schools than reopening schools, so they considered Abraham Lincoln. He was a racist, and they took the name of Abraham Lincoln Elementary or high school or whatever it was. They stripped those kinds of names off of 41 schools in San Francisco. That's what that school board was involved in. They weren't involved in trying to get the children, demasked or, let's analyze the science and let's reopen the schools. Their obsession is with all this wokeness. And the parents in San Francisco, man, they threw them out. That's incredible. I hope they throw out Nancy Pelosi next.
Well, you said we have a voting veto, so to speak. We can go to the ballot box and change it locally. And you made some comment like you're worried where all this goes. And some of this is founded on the fact that we do have a First Amendment. We do have a Constitution. And like you said, it was a break against governmental power. And there was even a discussion early on, I think, about whether we should enumerate it, because by enumerating it, we're limiting it just by listing what is implicitly there. But we have a First Amendment. And I think it's a good segue here to ask you about what's going on in Canada. There's a huge truckers protest there. They don't have a First Amendment. You go to England now, and people are being prosecuted just for name calling I'm not talking about like fighting words. I'm just talking about using words. And I know in Canada, people are being prosecuted for using the word man or getting fined where they don't have a First Amendment. And where it goes without somebody like you being a bulwark against the chiseling away of the First Amendment, I think it goes to those places. What are your thoughts on that stuff?
Well, let me just one point I want to make, because I make this a lot, about being a bulwark against these attacks against the First Amendment. I'm only an advocate, right? I'm an attorney. I represent a party. And this is what's important. The reason why I'm able to do the cases I'm doing is because there's some courageous individual who wants to exercise their First Amendment right. And so it's important, right? If you don't exercise these muscles, they atrophy. And I love what the truckers are doing, right? And they're engaging in, boycott is also part of, we see it all the time on the left. They boycott businesses, or they take actions that might slow down or affect, the bottom line of a company, doing it legally. And what the truckers are doing is, if it was done here, certainly in the United States and Canada, they don't have the full level of protection that we have, the right to free speech. And I'd like to see that truckers kind of take on that mantle here in the United States. I love to see what's going on up in Canada. Compare what they're doing, for example, to what we witnessed, all summer long last summer, and about the Black Lives Matter, right? Those are supposedly, the summer of love and peace. Meanwhile, we're all watching TV with these buildings on flame and these, the windows busted and cars overturned. Yeah. That's not speech. That's rioting. And you see the way the left handles and was treating the whole Black Lives Matter movement, which, by the way, was during the time when they had all these social gathering restrictions and mask restrictions, but yet all those were thrown out. And I guess, one of the comments I always made was that I guess the way you stop a pandemic is you riot, because apparently rioting, nobody was affected by rioting from this, from the disease. But you see the way that they're treating those two things, everything the truckers have been doing. And trust me, I mean, the left is looking for some act of violence or something that they can, pin on these truckers, but they've not. These guys are, red-blooded, hardworking Americans who said enough is enough. And so they're taking action, and they're going to affect public policy because of it. And I absolutely, applaud them for doing so. I've been mostly disappointed by the lack of opposition of the American people to all these restrictions that have been going on. We're starting to see it now. I mean, I go into stores now and it says, mask required, and I look around and 90% of the people there aren't wearing masks because they're like, I'm done with this. This is stupid. It was stupid from the beginning. And I just been a little bit more disappointed that there hasn't been stronger pushback by the American people of some of these restrictions that have been in place. As I've also said, when this pandemic first started, Americans are great neighbors, right? We are. I mean, look at the epicenter of the pandemic was New York City, and how many healthcare workers volunteered and really ran to the sound of the guns, as it were, to help out in New York City with the crisis that they were going through, doing it just volunteers. You see, whenever there's a hurricane or something, people coming from and helping each other out. That's our nature as Americans. We help out our, the Marshall Plan, and I mean, we rebuilt Europe and so forth. But we're also people who threw tea in the harbor, right? And so when it goes from just being a good neighbor and the initial, 14 days to flatten the curve and to reduce hospitalizations, okay, we'll go along, but then as these things started getting broader and broader and broader, it's like, wait a second, this is tyranny. This is no longer me being a good neighbor. This is tyranny. I'm going to start throwing tea in the harbor because I'm sick and tired of what's going on. So we have that as our nature. And I think we're at this point now where I'm starting to see people throwing tea in the harbor because we're done with with this tyranny and it's largely from the left. So that's how they operate. They're tyrannical by nature.
So the precedential effect, unless it's challenged in court and slapped down at the Supreme Court level, or at least the circuit court level, the precedential effect of all these restrictions they illegally and unconstitutionally did to the American people and to the various state populations. Some of the things here in Ohio, Governor DeWine did were outside of the Ohio Constitution. And unless those things are chased down by your clients, with you as their advocate, those will become legal precedents that they use down the road against us again. And so, you take your resurrection case. Now here you are, an Orthodox Catholic, self-described as such on your page, suing an archdiocese. Okay, which is incredible.
Just because we're suing the county health department.
Okay,
it's a health.
It's not the archdiocese, the policy that they wear the mask. Okay.
Yeah, our bishop is actually 100% supportive of our lawsuit. So I just want to make sure it's clear.
Other archdioceses,
so it's a First Amendment issue.
Other archdioceses in other areas of the country are on board with their local boards of health and are imposing these restrictions. There's a couple of lawsuits by Catholic parents against archdioceses. So in your situation, that's not the case. But unless people litigate this, these precedents are set. 10, 15 years from now, they're going to look back and say, well, hey, it stood and there's no decisions against what DeWine did or what Biden did, or frankly, what some of the things Trump did.
Yeah, I think hopefully one of the outcomes with this election is not only at the national level where we see a flipping of the House and potentially the Senate, but also in the local elections, the gubernatorial races and the state legislatures, is we need to take a hard look at these emergency powers acts, right? Because most of these governors are acting pursuant to legislation that grants them, certain powers to essentially legislate, irrespective of having to go back to the legislatures. So I'm hoping one of the things that happens is that there's a hard look at what in these public health laws. When you look at the authority we're given to these public health departments and these public health officials to operate
FEMA.
Unilaterally.
Yeah, and FEMA.
Yeah. So it's off the looking at that enabling legislation and getting rid of that so that there's a break on that, right? It goes back to the separation of powers where you don't have the executive branch, the governor carrying all the power. They have to go back to the legislature after so many days to get authority and approvals. And that's where, your voice can be heard more through the legislature than it can be through one singular voice, and perhaps even put in place a judicial review component to bring in the third branch of government. But we need to take a hard look at the enabling legislation. So for example, here in Michigan, there was the Emergency Powers Act, which granted the governor 30 days to exercise emergency powers, but after 30 days, she had to renew that with the legislature. Well, after she did that, the first 30 days of this pandemic, like April of whatever, I'm losing track of what year this all started. It's been going on for so long.
2020, yeah.
2020, the legislature said, no, we're not going to renew her powers. Well, she said, oh, well, look, there's this Emergency Powers of Governors Act, which I don't have to go to the legislature. I'm going to start enacting my laws pursuant to that. That was challenged in court, and the Michigan Supreme Court held that it was unlawful. And so she could no longer use that unilateral power. But what ended up happening? She turned to her health department and said, use the public health code to enact all these restrictions. And that's what ended up happening. Rather than coming from the governor's office, they came from the county health department and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Our legislature needs to go back and revisit the authority that's being granted to these agencies to enact these type of measures during so-called crises, right? Because now we're hearing, gun violence is the new crisis, or climate change is the next crisis, right? Yeah. And so this thing is going to be never ending. It's what Rahm Emanuel said: never let a good crisis go to waste, right? The left, they have to operate in fear. That's what tyrants do. They keep you in fear, and then they're the ones that have the solutions to all this. We're going to keep you afraid, keep you in fear, and that's how they keep their power.
Rob,
we need to shift that.
So spot on. So just today, Mayor Ginther, who's the mayor of Columbus, Ohio, had a press conference and announced that he was declaring a public health emergency and deputizing the Department of Health in the city of Columbus to address gun violence. So, here we go again. I'm sure they're going to take another stab at, quote, assault, unquote, rifles and all that silly stuff. And, of course, that has nothing to do with it. We just had a mass stabbing incident, like 9 victims or 11 victims a couple days ago here in the U.S. And nobody's talking about taking away steak knives. It's just that
and in fact,
we're focused on the object.
It was a year or so ago, I think London had a higher murder rate than New York City, which that obviously has changed now because of the policies they put in place. and there's no guns in them. They're all either knife killings or some other blunt object or instrument. And there was actually talk about making it illegal to have a knife, and people saying, so if I go to a store to buy a knife for to cook with, how do I get it home? It's just that kind of silliness. It's just
it leads to just absurdity. The more they tinker.
It does.
Well, look, we got. I know we got to wrap it up. We're running out of time, but there's one last topic I want to get your thoughts on, and it was a case that you referenced last time we talked on the phone. Before we did this, it was the Bible Believers case up there, and the reason I looked it up and I read it, and frankly, anybody who wants any education at all about the First Amendment, that the Sixth Circuit in their en banc review, meaning the entire court, all the judges together, they came up with an opinion here that summarizes the value of the First Amendment and freedom of speech, it probably as well as anyone ever could. And you were at the helm of that one.
Yeah, that's of all the cases that I've done, that one in that opinion, and just a little background of that, because it's really a remarkable case. This group, Bible Believers, they went to this Arab International Festival in Dearborn, Michigan, which has one of the largest populations of Muslim Americans in all of the United States. I've represented two other clients prior to the Bible Believers. One was this pastor, George Saig, who wanted to hand out religious literature at the Arab Festival on the public sidewalks, which remained open for the public. They said no. We sued, lost in the district court, won in the Sixth Circuit, and said no, this violates the First Amendment. I represented a group of one was a former Muslim who were evangelizing at the Arab Festival, and thankfully they were videotaping. The police came up and said, "You're disturbing the peace." And they arrested them, put them in handcuffs. They had to go through a criminal trial. I represented them in the criminal trial, and they were acquitted. Thankfully, we had video. It was this conversation between this former Muslim who was answering questions from these other. I mean, they were literally raising their hands, asking questions. It was more peaceful than probably most high school classes that you would see on a given day. And they literally put them in handcuffs, threw them in jail, spent a night in the jail, and they were acquitted. We turned around and we sued the city of Dearborn again and won again. So Bible Believers are like, you know what, we're going to go there to this Arab Festival where they keep suppressing the free speech rights of Christians, and we're going to protest with signs peacefully, walking up and down the sidewalks, which they did. And they were literally attacked. They were assaulted with rocks and bottles by it looked like something, you watch the old films of the Palestinians, pelting the Israelis and Israel. I mean, they were literally, they were bloodied, they were bleeding. And so they went up to the Wayne County Sheriff's Department. Interestingly, the city of Dearborn said, we're no longer providing any police service for the Arab Festival because they've paid the American Freedom Law Center so many attorney's fees over the last two prior years. So they turned it over to the Wayne County Sheriff's Department. And the city of Dearborn's like, we don't want anything to do with this thing. We're backing out. So the Wayne County Sheriff's Department took over at policing the festival. And they had one of their commanders, one of their senior officers there, told the Bible Believers that if they didn't leave the Arab Festival, they would be arrested for disturbing the peace. And the Bible Believers like, us? How about the people that are throwing rocks and bottles at us? See the blood coming down my head? And so they left under protest, and we sued. The district court ruled against us. We appealed. The 3-judge panel. You get a right to one appeal to the appellate court. This was the Sixth Circuit, and we lost 2-1. And the dissenting judge was Judge Clay. Judge Clay, he's an old school liberal, African American. No doubt grew up during the civil rights era, understood the importance of free speech, no doubt, disliked what the Bible Believers were saying on the public sidewalk. But he wrote a dissent, and he said, not only is this opinion wrong, it's dangerously wrong. I mean, it was a scathing dissent. So we filed what's called a petition for rehearing en banc, and that's asking the full court to rehear this important First Amendment case. So you only get a 3-judge panel as a matter of right. You have to petition and get a full court hearing en banc. That's what that means, a full court. There's 15 judges, 15 active judges who sit on it's the entire active court of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. It's a rarity to have an en banc. So they granted that. And so I re-argued the case before the 15-judge panel. That's a unique experience in and of itself.
I bet it is.
Like having the 15 and handling the questions from 15 different judges.
Wow.
But we won, and the person who wrote the majority opinion was Judge Clay, and it is a beautiful exposition of the First Amendment, the importance of First Amendment, the importance of right? If the First Amendment doesn't protect off-putting speech, then there's no need for it.
Right.
Right. And that's the problem with these labels of hate speech. There's no category under the First Amendment that carves out an exception for hate speech. Not at all. If anything, hate speech arguably is protected, most protected speech. Right. And he went through this concept of a heckler's veto, right, where those who disagree with your speech can't silence the speaker by engaging in illegal conduct. The role of the government is to protect the speaker, which is just the opposite of what the Wayne County Sheriff's Department did, is they threatened to arrest the speaker because of the illegal actions taken by those who oppose the speech. But it's just a very, very well done opinion. There are very, very, very few exceptions to First Amendment protection, and they're very narrow categories, typically defamation, obscenity, fighting words, truth threats, and incitement. And those are such narrow categories that almost never apply. They're very narrowly defined. So whenever you hear people, that's why when they say, well, they're a hate group engaging in hate speech, it's utter nonsense. The idea that misinformation is somehow not protected by the First Amendment is utter nonsense. Again, who decides what's the misinformation and what's the proper information? Right. It's all tyrannical. It's all Orwellian. I am all for this free, open marketplace of ideas. Absolutely. And what the social media and these corporations in conjunction with the government are doing right now are threatening the very, very fiber core foundation of our Constitution and thus our fundamental freedoms.
Rob, Steve got his last question, and I'm gonna just hit you with a quick one. It seems to me the way to address this social media free speech issue, the ideal situation would be to address it directly instead of nibbling around with, J.D. Vance is talking about the Taft-Hartley Act, breaking up big monopolies. That's a nice strategy. Your Section 230 arguments are a nice strategy. But what if Congress, I was looking at Title VII and the categories of protected classes for public accommodation, okay? So you can't discriminate for race, religion, national origin, age, sex, pregnancy, citizenship, familial status, disabilities, veteran, or genetics. What if Congress were to pass a law that says your political opinions that is a protected class? People who hold whatever their political opinions are, that's also protected under Title VII. Then if social media is a public accommodation, which it surely is, wouldn't that be the most direct way to handle this in the future? Or what do you think about that?
Well, the first problem with that is Section 230. Because Section 230 provides absolute immunity against any of those, because the California Unruh Act is in essence to like a public accommodation law. I always have a problem with any of that type of legislation to begin with, be honest with you. Okay. Right? Because it always ends up being turned against people. Right? Look at what the public accommodation laws have done to the bakers out in Colorado. Right, because they don't want to bake a cake, for a so-called same-sex marriage because it violates their religious beliefs, but they get hammered by these public accodomination laurs
again and again.
And so there's again and again. The more we can take the power away from government, I'd rather find a way to address this from a free speech perspective and maybe have an alternate platforms. But it's an interesting concept. I'd have to think about what would be the negative repercussions of that, and how that's, because those things usually get turned on conservatives quicker than anything else. And so that would be my only concern with more legislation in these areas. But that's why I think Section 230 is problematic. But these social media companies, they're sui generis. It's a unique, that quote I read from the Supreme Court, they are pretty much the new, town hall. So how do we address that? So we understand still have this distinction between private actors and the government in a way that I don't have a complete answer to that yet.
So
it's a tough question. The easier question is when they conspire with the government and they're working hand in hand on things, then that's problematic. But as a private entity, I'm not for legislation.
Gotcha. So further development of what written about the decision in the Packingham case. That portends good things. So if we could expand that and get a clear statement that cyberspace is the public square, now we're rolling.
Yeah, and I have no problem with like I said, the defense aspect of Section 230 immunities, because that promotes the free market, the free exchange of ideas. At the end of the day, I wish everybody would just dump Twitter, dump YouTube, dump Facebook, make them like not even consequential. Yeah. And then we, let the markets rise up with Rumble and these other places. That way, if I had my perfect solution, that's what it would be. I would dump these guys, drain them of their revenue, make them inconsequential, make them just, something of the past, and move forward with social media platforms that actually respect the public different opinions and views.
Well, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. It's an interesting way to look at it, because there's not, maybe the takeaway from all this, there's not going to be a quick solution. There just has to be everybody individually paying attention to what's going on, standing up to it, and let the market evolve. And I think it is happening. People are going to other platforms. And, the school board debates I watch on YouTube every day, people are keen to it now. And the more, if one person is, then so will another, and so on and so on. So, hey, thanks a lot for the work you're doing,
Rob.
man. Great stuff. Thanks. And again, you just want to tell us, if people want to look you up and what you guys are doing, where do they go?
Best place is just go to our website, AmericanFreedomLawCenter.org.
All right. Cool. Thanks, Rob. We appreciate it.